Let's talk coils. So we released these coils.
Much to the chagrin of the internet.
Well, we sold a bunch of them. So it's been a great product release, and there are currently many happy, satisfied customers driving around with these coils in their car. But yeah, I think it's kind of like, when Kanye drops a new album,
That's quite the reference.
70% of the internet loses its mind. Or when Kim Kardashian broke the internet with her ass. That's kind of like what these coils are like. So just to review what is the product. It is an OEM style ignition coil for DAZA, MQB, B9 3.0T applications. We have managed to create a coil that has a higher potential output than the factory coil with a heatsink that helps cool the internal electronics. The factory OEM coil is just potted on the top here, and there is no heatsink. They're also red, which I think is
+5
pretty important. One of our competitors, APR, released a coil like this years ago in like an array of rainbow colors, and they've been very popular. But I know, like I'll say on the DAZA with the engine or the NQB with the engine cover off, these coils look badass. I think they look really good. And if you want to spruce up your engine compartment and nothing else, it's a perfectly good thing to do for not a ton of money. But this is a substantive product that works well. Let me talk for a minute about how ignition coils work. Okay, so if you take a piece of wire and you wrap it into a coil, you create something that's called an inductor, which some of you may know. If you run electrical current through that inductor, you will generate a magnetic field. So the inductor converts the electrical current into a different type of energy, which is magnetism. If you charge that coil and the other end of it is ground has the potential to connect to a ground, then when you release the voltage or current going to the inductor, the magnetic field disappears, and the magnetic field is converted back into electrical energy inside the inductor. And then that electricity has to go somewhere. And so it will ground itself or go to a negative post. How an ignition coil works is it is charged ultimately by the battery, and it fills with electricity and creates a magnetic field. The ECU controls this and releases the energy on the ignition driver. And when the current ceases, that current, which is creating a magnetic field, turns back into electricity and has to go somewhere. So it goes to the spark plug. And it goes inside the spark plug. And the only way it can ground is if it arcs across the electrode of the spark plug, which is called ionization. As that electricity passes from one post to the other and grounds itself to the engine through the grounding strap on the ignition, it creates a spark. That spark creates combustion. Now, you can increase the output of the coil in several ways. You could increase the amount of current you put into it. So if you put in, 1 amp of current, you can create a certain amount of magnetic field that will then discharge. But if you put 2 or 3 amps, you can up to a certain point create more spark energy or the potential to spark. At some point, the coil has a limit on how much it can charge, and that's called saturation. And so at some point, the inductor, because of its size, fails to produce a more powerful magnetic field, fails to capture more electrical current, and it saturates.
And you can actually just make heat then, and then you're basically that charge energy will drop.
And the hotter the inductor gets, the more heat that builds up in it, the lower its saturation point is, right? Which is why we added the heat sinks. So all that to say that what we did is, if we can make this inductor inside here bigger, it can charge more and generate more current. Subsequently, if we can keep the heat lower, then we can reduce the saturation point. Now, what does this mean for you? Well, if you install this in your, let's say you have a 720 horsepower 034 Motorsport Stage 3 B9S4 TT710. You install these coils. Will you make more horsepower? No. I mean, you just won't just all of a sudden make more horsepower. Not unless maybe your spark plugs are on their way out or something, and you need a coil with a little bit of extra ability to arc across that compromised spark plug. It's possible you could get a little more complete combustion and make more power. Will your coils be red after you install these? Yes, they will be red. They won't be black anymore, which is terrible. When you open your hood, black coils they just don't look good. What does it mean that we say they're more powerful? Okay, well, here's the best analogy I can come up with. You have two friends, and you know that one of your friends is 10% stronger than the other. And so you go to the gym and you say, guys, here's a 50-pound dumbbell. I want you both to curl this. And guess what? Your weaker friend curls it 5 times, puts it down. Your stronger friend picks it up, curls it 5 times, puts it down. Your stronger friend is still 10% stronger than your weaker friend. That doesn't mean he could lift a 50-pound weight any better than your weaker friend. Okay. So at some point, if you keep increasing the weight, and let's say you get to 100 pounds, your weaker friend may only be able to curl that 3 times. And your friend who's 10% stronger will be able to curl that 5 times still. And then you may get to 120 pounds, and your weaker friend may only be able to curl it once. And your friend who's 10% stronger may be able to still curl it 3 times. Okay, so this is the same thing with ignition coils. If you take 2 coils, and one is 10% more output than the other, and you put them both in the same application, and you don't demand anything more from either coil, then they will both produce the same amount of power. So what is the significance of a higher current coil? What does that get you? Well, at some point, as you turn up the power, one of the coils will have trouble ionizing across that gap, and the other will not. Okay? We don't know what the limit of the factory coil is. We're not here to say that the factory coil is inferior, that it's bad, that it needs to be upgraded, or anything like that. But if you would like a red coil that has more current potential, that has better cooling because of its heatsink, so it will have less of issues with saturation, then this is a great upgrade for about $50 each. I think if you buy 6, we give it a small discount. And it is a substantive product. It does what we say it does. Some people are asking for tests and they want us to cut these in half and all that. We're not going to do that. Nobody else does that stuff. I have never seen MSD, which is like an ignition coil company, do any of those things. So we're here to engineer products. We don't lie about our products, and this is a great product. I believe from all the ignition coil upgrade options I've seen on the market, this is by far the best. And I would definitely stand behind that.
And I mean, it's also, you get to the point where, coils are a wear item. Many cars these days are getting to the age where, that use these coils are getting to the point where it's a replacement item. Because they do, deteriorate with age. So yes, you now have an option to do it with a higher performing option.
So a couple follow-up questions. Since the engine bay is hot, don't the heat sinks on the coil packs only absorb more heat from the engine bay and put them into the coil packs? Okay, no. So whoever thinks this or says this, I would ask you, how is the factory ignition coil cooled? It's air cooled. Okay. If there was no airflow in the engine compartment, or the heat in the engine compartment was higher than the ignition coil, then your factory ignition coils would overheat. The fact of the matter is, I think people think that engine compartments are ovens.
Sealed.
An oven is a sealed, insulated place that is designed to hold a certain high temperature. The engine compartment has to be the opposite. Everything in your engine compartment would overheat if your engine compartment was sealed. So because that would be very problematic, everything in your engine compartment would overheat. Your injectors would overheat. Your engine would overheat. All the plastic would melt in your engine compartment if it was a sealed, hot environment. So the fact of the matter is, the engine compartments pretty cool, nice place to be when the car is moving. And the factory spends a lot of time designing the airflow through the engine compartment. You actually see this on various engine covers and pieces in the engine that direct airflow.
Yeah.
You see a lot of this in the radiator support too, where there's openings in the radiator that shoot air to different places in the engine compartment. You see covers with, little vents in them to either let heat out or let air go in. So, the factory ignition coil is a heat sink. It radiates heat and cools the coil, keeps the coil from overheating. We've added to that by adding the heat sinks. The heat sinks also add a thermal capacity reservoir where instantaneous heat from inside the electronics here can escape to the heatsink. And a lot of what ignition coils have to do is kind of these instantaneous ramp ups. They're not always sustained long-term heat events. So yeah, the heat sinks do actually cool. Ignition coils are not sealed inside an oven stock. The engine compartment is designed to cool everything inside the engine compartment. Now, you would die in the engine compartment. Humans.
We're talking like mechanical things that have a much different operating window.
I think people think like, well, it's really hot when I touch things. My skin get, Well, yeah, the engine compartment is not a place for people to live. It's a place for ignition coils. You could heat this thing up to 200, Fahrenheit easily. It's going to still operate just fine. It just can't ever get to 500 or 600 degrees.
We're talking like literally at the transistor level inside of that is what's, needs to be cooled. Actively dissipating that heat versus just absorbing it with some epoxy is the difference.
Yeah. So someone's asking about real world advantage, and it's what I said. It's the ability to ionize the spark under higher load conditions than the factory coil, and with better cooling and heat management, so less chance of saturation, which also helps it deal with higher horsepower applications. It's brand new. It's a very high quality manufactured piece that's upgraded, and it's red. That's definitely the biggest real.
That's literally all the things we say.
Yeah.
So it's
also, does this increase the horsepower by 10%? No, we have never said
it would.
Again, because of what I explained, you can't just get 10% more spark energy out of an application that doesn't need it. So that would be like saying that your 10% stronger friend somehow lifted the 50-pound dumbbell 10% better than your other friend who had no issue lifting it as well.
I mean, there gets to a point where you get a very weak spark that ionizes, and you can have a improper combustion at that point, and then a stronger coil will help that. But we're not going to sit on those edge cases and market this as something that's everyone's going to benefit from that kind of situation.
I think that's all the coil questions that makes it.
How often should you replace them? I mean, that's a tough one to answer. That entirely depends on use and environment.
Generally, when you need it. So if you're having misfiring problems and it's not your plugs and it's nothing else, and you put in new coils, we do see that. We replace a lot of coils in our service department, CTFO. So.
Somebody's asking what the heatsink material is and how it's made into the housing. I believe it's screwed in internally and then epoxied around it. So
it's attached to the electronics, then it's all potted, and it's aluminum, just like any heatsink. Yeah. Do they make heat sinks out of anything other than aluminum?
Oh yeah, copper. I mean,
okay.
There's a ton of it. It could be steel. It could be anything.
99.9% of every heatsink I've ever seen is made from
for stuff like this. So
Yep. All right. Any more questions? Drop them in. So yeah, and like I said, we've sold a ton of them, and we're going to run out of stock at some point because our next ship is out. So we're happy with the product. It's been a great release. We put it on all our high horsepower in-house cars, and it's been great.